I'm going to introduce to you Professor Robert West, who is a dear colleague and friend. So it's amazing to be here introducing you. And I'll try to be very quick. So Professor Robert West is a professor emeritus at University College of London. He's an associate for the Center for Behavior Change. And he has really amazing, large experience on behavioral science, addiction. He was one of the co-founders of the Behavior Change Wheel, the Combi model. He created the prime theory of motivation. For those that work in the field of addiction, I'm pretty sure you've seen his name everywhere in papers in addiction. And in the last 8 years, I think, he has done a lot of work on ontology development, and I had the pleasure to collaborate with Robert, Susan, and others here in the Human Behavior Change Project, and Robert is doing an amazing work in ontology development. Apart from being a great scientist and really putting a lot of effort in developing the science of behavior change, Robert has also done a lot of work in translating our knowledge to actually practice and guidelines and policy making. So he has been involved in a lot of initiatives that he's going to talk about during his keynote on how we can translate our knowledge to policy and guidelines and practice. Another fun fact about Robert, because I have to say that, I was told I couldn't forget this part.
But not by me.
Not by you. I won't say who told me that. So Robert is also an amazing guitar player. For those of you that have seen him play, he's really amazing. He loves the blues. He has a collection of the guitars. So if you want to network and talk about music, Robert is also your person. Robert, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. I think that's the best introduction I've ever had. Right, so we've got 35 minutes or so, and I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the sort of interface between behavioral science and communication. I'm not a communications expert, and so the stuff on communications, for those of you who are, if I've got it all wrong, then forget it. It's or I don't want to know, basically. But what I hope to do in this talk is to explore some ideas with you about how we can structure the way that we communicate for the purpose of behavior change using behavioral science. And you won't be surprised to know that I'm going to draw a lot on the Combi model, excuse me, and the behavior change wheel as part of the way in which we can apply behavioral science as a framework, which we can apply behavioral science to the communication issue. But what I recognize, and those of you who came to the workshop yesterday will be very, very aware of this, is that behavioral science, as we understand it, and the theories and the evidence and so on, can only take you so far in terms of developing a real hard-hitting, effective, impactful communication campaign. There is so much more work to do once you've decided on your behavior change techniques to get that thing in a way that's going to actually make an impact and work. Practical things as well as scientific things. So what we're going to be looking at is this sort of dual process, as it were. But you start with the behavioral science to get you to where you want to be in terms of your storyboard for your intervention, and then a lot of the real work starts with the communication and communication science. So the three parts of this talk are going to be, first of all, just to take you through, at least my understanding as a consumer of communication science, what I think it's telling us, and to try and give you some, for those of you who are not really familiar with it, some sort of headlines to help you to orient yourselves towards communication science and how that may impact on behavior change interventions. Then I'm going to take you through very, very briefly all of this. This is a whistle-stop tour. The slides will be available, and I'm sure the recordings will be available. But so don't worry if you miss stuff, because I'm going to go through it really quickly. But it'll be there for you afterwards. But looking at how you develop a communication strategy using behavioral science, and then the last bit, which is turning that strategy into a campaign. Ready? Here we go. Okay, so where does communication fit into the overall strategy? Those of you who are familiar with the behavior change wheel will know that it is one of the implementation options on the outside of the wheel, but it's very important to understand that it is pretty much central to everything that you do. It doesn't matter what your intervention is, whether it's legislation, whether it's I don't know, some sort of coercion, or whether it's a fiscal policy, whatever it might be, whether it's guidelines and so on, communication is going to be integral. So when you're translating the intervention functions of education, persuasion, incentivization, and so on, many of these you can do directly through communication, and sometimes that's all that's done, and sometimes that's a mistake, because sometimes governments think all we need is a communication campaign, and they're wrong, and sometimes they're right. So, you know, it's horses for courses. But sometimes what we need is these other kinds of implementation strategy, and communication plays an integral role there. So key message number one is that communications, even if you're an academic and you're working on developing an intervention that might be an app, or it might be some kind of counseling intervention or support, even there, the communication is incredibly important. And now I'm going to try and get this slide to move on. We had this problem actually in the workshop, and the only way of, oh, here we go. Okay, and then it moves on several at a time, right? Okay, okay, right. Okay, what is communication? Well, as someone who spends a lot of my time thinking about ontologies, I don't want to answer the question of what is communication, because there can be many things to many people. I'm going to tell you what I understand to be a concept that we use the term communication for, and then we will work from there. And I use Shannon and Weaver's. I don't know if any of you, do any of you remember Shannon and Weaver, famous thank you. Famous engineers who built a whole science of communication, but essentially at its very broadest, the transmission of information. Now, we're interested in a subset of that, which is active communication, in which it's transmission with a purpose. The purpose may or may not be limited to the information itself. And of course, when we're dealing with behavior change, it isn't. The purpose when we're dealing with behavior change, the purpose is to change behavior. And so the success or failure of a communication intervention, or communications in an intervention, is going to be judged by how far it achieves whatever the purpose is. And the last thing to say about that, about communication in this very broad sense and this way of looking at it, is that it involves a source, a message, and a receiver. And those three features, those attributes, really should permeate everything that you do when you're thinking about communication. And the way to think about it is it's kind of like a radio set in reverse. In the old-fashioned radio sets, you tune the set to the source, okay, to the station, the radio station. As communicators, our job is to tune the source to the receiver. And that is hard to do. It requires good audience research. It requires understanding what the features of the receiver are. And that's what we're going to talk about. So if you wanted to deliver behavior change techniques through communication, you have a job to do to even get to the starting blocks. If it's for many of the interventions that you're talking about and that we use in our work, you can assume that very often that the people who you're attempting to work with to change behavior are going to be interacting in some way with the intervention. Not so with communication. We live in a world in which the demands on our attention and our attention span and our time, our eyeballs time is a very precious commodity. And that's an important starting point. But the attention, the first part of it, is only one part. We have to get comprehension. The people have to understand what it is that we're talking about. They have to get the message. All of these things, by the way, have a science behind them, and you can look it up. I won't go into it, obviously, because of time. But all of these things, it is much better if you have a challenge with regard to any of these things, not to just make it up, or, or think, oh, well, this will be a good idea. Look it up, okay? See, because there is work that's been done on attention, on comprehension. But even once you get comprehension, you've then got an important task in terms of getting acceptance. Are people going to believe what it is that you're saying? If you've got the behavior change technique, for example, of let's say explaining about the consequences of a behavior, the positive and negative consequences, that's fine, but it's only going to work if people actually believe what you're saying. And of course, in many cases, in a contested environment, apparently increasingly in a contested environment, you've got lots of people coming in from different angles with conflicting information. So there's a whole job to do there. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of this talk. But then they have to remember it at the critical time. Behavior change is always about what someone's doing at a particular moment. And that moment won't be probably while they're looking at your communication. So your communication has to change them in some way, change the way they think, change what they what they can remember and so on, so that, excuse me, when the time comes, the message is there and it's ready to be activated. And then finally, there has to be engagement. Your audience has to get involved with the message in some way. Those of you who are in the social psychology sphere will know about the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion. That's an important example of that. Right. So that's your job as a communications person, even to get to the starting line. Then let's have a look at what kinds of communication function there are out there that we can harness in the service of behavior change. And I've just myself taken the liberty, with a little bit of help from the sources that I read, of classifying these in 4 types. It's just one way of looking at it, but it sort of works for me. One is informative. What kind of, if your job is to inform, then what kind of work are you needing to do? What kind of function does your communication have to serve in order to achieve that? And we've got things like a prize. For those of you who don't know what the word a prize means, it means learn for the first time. And a lot of the time when we're communicating, we're telling people something they didn't know, okay? But a lot of the time we're not. We're telling them something they already knew, but we're telling it in a different way. So there's lots of other types of information giving. We can demonstrate, we can show through videos, whatever, demonstrations of whatever kind. We can remind, explain, promise, threaten, confirm, and warn. By the way, I have to give a bit of a word of thanks to Claude.ai for expanding my list. The first list that I came up with from my reading was about half this long. And then I said to Claude.ai, and there's a lot of Claude in this talk, by the way, those of you who don't use it, but probably DeepSeek would be better for reasons that I may go into at the end. Anyway, very good at coming up with things that you hadn't thought of. And you think, oh yeah, okay. Plus some things that don't make any sense. So you've still got to apply a bit of brain power to it. Then there's injunctive, that you can permit, you can suggest, recommend, invite, and so on. I won't go through the whole list. This is something for you to peruse afterwards. And then very importantly, very often with communications, you've got an emotive function. Anything from challenging, empathizing, comforting, to supporting, inspiring. Very often what you need to do in your communications is inspire. It's blooming hard to do. So much of the time as behavioral scientists, we come up with our behavior change techniques and we come up with messages for our text messaging program or our posters or whatever it might be. Yeah, it's okay, but it's not really going, it's not sort of, shaking the world. And this is where the creatives, the people who work in these comms agencies, are so good at coming up with things very often, not always, but very often, things that, oh yeah, it really hits the mark. But there's also inquisitive. There's checking. There's finding out about your audience, for example. And sometimes these things can serve more than one function. Okay, so the reason I've sort of gone on about this is because we're going to come back to it at the end with a sort of demonstration. But there's also the tone. What kind of a tone are you going to adopt in your communications? Are you going to be generous, friendly, playful, rebellious, etc.? Or are you going to be commanding, stern? And as a little exercise for myself in testing this this framework, I thought, what kind of communication would you, or what kind of labels would you apply to the communication delivered by Donald Trump? I wouldn't say generous, friendly, playful, rebellious, empathetic, whimsical, or ironic. I would say commanding, and I would say, interesting to me, you may challenge me on this one, heroic to his followers, commanding and heroic. That's his target audience. They're looking for people with a tone like that. So if he was generous, friendly, or whatever, he would be not, as a source, he would be missing the mark. He would not be tuning himself into the kind of audience that he's wanting to. He might tune himself into us, but then good luck with that. Then you've got the type of audience that you have to consider here: friendly, hostile, attentive, distracted, and so on. I won't go into the details, but because we'll come back to that at the end. And I just wanted to share this cartoon, which I got, actually I use FreePick. I don't know how many of you use FreePick, but what I did is I got Claude to give me the sort of concept for the cartoon, which I wanted, and then I got FreePick to deliver it. And by the way, as you probably know, if you use these image generating AI applications, they're terrible at doing text. They just do gibberish. They don't understand text. But so you have to add the text. Anyway, it says here, in case you want to know, you only hear what you want to hear, and the man is with the glass in his hand to say, yes, please, a top up will be great. So that I feel I kind of identify with that man. That's my slight concern. But essentially, one of the key things is you have to address your audience's preconceptions. So what are the key messages for the first third of this presentation? Communicate to activate. Thank you, Claude, for that. Every behavior change intervention should include a communication strategy. With communication, the audience must attend, comprehend, accept, recall, and engage, and the source and the message must be tuned to the receiver. And important features to consider are the communication function, the tone, and the audience. Okay, so that's my sort of Cook's tour of how we can think about what the communication science literature tells us for what we're trying to achieve. Now let's take a step back and look at what the behavioral science can get us to. And I guess pretty well everyone here, or if not everyone, will know about the behavior change wheel, and you will be aware that the behavior change wheel forms the core part of a broader strategy in which you start with deciding on your target behavior and your target group. That takes you through to conducting your behavioral diagnosis using the COMBI model, and you go from there to your intervention types and so on and so forth. And of course, it's presented in that kind of logical flow. But as we all know, those of us who develop interventions, there's a lot of backwards and forwards. There's a lot of cycling through. And at each decision point in the process, you would be applying something like your own version of, or even our version of, the appease criteria to when you make decisions. To what extent is your decision, the result of your decision, going to be acceptable, practicable, affordable, effective in terms of impact? What are the spillover effects going to be, and to what extent is it going to increase or decrease equity? And those help you to think broadly about your decisions. And so often when we're doing behavior change interventions, the effective part is actually not that hard. It's the effective part that's also practicable and affordable. So often, especially with communication campaigns, you have to think, well, I've only got this budget. What's the best that I can achieve with that? And it may not be the best that you can achieve, but it'd be the best that you can achieve with that budget and with whatever the practical constraints are, like the amount of time you can buy on TV and radio and so on. So now that particular chart is drawn from a guide that I helped to write with Public Health Wales. I've put the QR code up here for those of you who want to download the guide. This is a sort of a version, if you like, of the behavior change wheel that's been specifically developed for this kind of governmental work, with Ashley Gold and the incredible team at Public Health Wales, the behavioural science unit there. And of course, there's the Behaviour Change Wheel book, and there's a QR code for those of you who don't already have it. I also, I'm going to draw quite a lot in this talk. I'm drawing quite a lot in this talk on a specific guide that Public Health Wales Behavioural Science Unit has produced on behavioural informed communication. I had nothing to do with it. It was so I can say it's terrific. It's really good. So have a look at that, and it's free to download. And I'm just going to support. Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry. Was that too quick? Anyway, you'll have the slides later, so you can download these things. But I will say that this is one of just many incredibly useful resources that the Public Health Wales Behavioural Science Unit produces, and this is a link to the website for that unit that you can then have a look at what other sources they've got. They're developing tools at a very rapid rate and doing a fantastic job. There's some great stuff. I'm sort of sounding a bit like Trump really here in terms of hyperbole, but in this case, it's not hyperbole. Now, for those of you who are kind of power users of COMBI and the behavior change wheel, I would say, then with Public Health Wales, I've developed this thing called the CACTIS tool, which stands for COMBI Assessment Criteria to Intervention Strategy Spreadsheet. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but this is actually it's a Google spreadsheet, but you can download it and turn it into an Excel spreadsheet if you like. And it's a tool to take you from a COMBI diagnosis through to the selection of your behavior change techniques. And have a look at it. It's in early stage of development. The only thing I would say about it, I think this link is to a video that I did showing how to use it. What was that? Okay, so the only thing I would say about it is that you definitely can't use it on a mobile device, and even on a laptop, it requires quite a big screen. So it's better to use on a desktop. Right, and then another model of change, one which I've been working with Freud's Plus on, and we ran a workshop on this yesterday. This is a sort of an adaptation of the behavior change wheel specifically for comms, developed by and with a communications agency. So these are people who know what they're talking about, and this is their particular take on it. And there's a couple of things to note in it. It starts with the concept of the behavior change wheel, but when it comes to the COMBI part of it, which is the middle part, the hub, then it really highlights those parts of COMBI that are particularly relevant to comms. And then the next thing it does is it translates that into something that comms experts and communications agencies, a sort of model that is more familiar to them, which is what they call the think, feel, act model. And those of you who are psychologists, particularly social psychologists, will see, I think, how that aligns with the tripartite theory of attitudes, which is conation, cognition, and affect. And basically, it's such a powerful meme, this idea of the three aspects of human experience and behavior, which is thinking, feeling, and acting. And when you're trying to develop a communications campaign, you want to be really clear what it is that you're trying to achieve in terms of these three things. That then takes you to the most relevant parts of the intervention functions. And then on the outside is for the Freud's Plus own sort of culture, their approach to how they always approach communications campaigns. And this is just a sort of version of the stepwise thing that I showed you a bit earlier, but specifically for comms. And as I say, with apologies for going through it really quickly, but I want to make sure that you know, we cover all the ground, but and the slides are available. But you get the basic idea. But just to drill down a little bit into the COM-B diagnosis, what I've done is to select out some key questions from the Public Health Wales Guide and the Freud's Plus guide as well, the sort of questions that you want answers to help you to target your messaging, to decide what behavior change techniques you want to be using. First of all, how aware are they of the behavior and precisely what constitutes it? This is kind of like the beginning point. If they don't know that the thing exists, you know, and so much of comms is around that, is around just raising awareness, because with the assumption that, you know, a certain proportion of people, once they're made aware of something, they will engage with it. But then people need to know, for example, how they can do it. If they don't know how to do it, if it's complex or it's difficult, if you don't know, for example, you've got a stop smoking service and you don't know where it is, you don't know how to access it, of course, the behavior isn't going to happen. So these are all capability factors. How well do they understand the benefits of doing it and the costs of not doing it? And how confident are they that they can do it? So this helps to structure the way you do your audience research or your literature review in order to find what BCTs you ought to be applying. How far is it considered normal? This is now opportunity, social and physical opportunity. How far is it considered normal within the social environment? Again, so much of what we do in comms is to normalize things, to normalize behaviors, or sometimes to denormalize them if we're trying to make them something where the behavior is reduced. How far are there actual formal rules or expectations about the behavior? How much support do they have if they need it in their social environment? And to what extent are they exposed to prompts or cues for the behavior? So those are things to be thinking about, you know, all part of the way in which you can structure your investigation to figure out what your messaging should be. So you're developing your intervention strategy. And then, of course, motivation is such an important part of what you're trying to change with communications. And we have a list of things here, including obviously how worthwhile they think it is, how much enjoyment or satisfaction they expect to get from it, to what extent is it provoked by an emotion or a drive state, and how far do they expect it to reduce or prevent mental or physical discomfort. How well does it fit with their identity? Identity is so crucial. You've really got to sort of tap into, at least be consistent with the identity of your target audience. How far can you actually really target intentions? So actually get people to commit to an intention to engage in the behavior that can carry them through when's needed. And critically, how much of a priority is it over all the other things they could be doing? So with those questions, you're potentially giving yourself, if you can answer those questions with research, audience research, literature reviews, whatever it might be, the science part of it, then you can start to build your intervention using your intervention functions and behavior change techniques. And what I've put here is just how that translates into the think, feel, act kind of language. Okay, so obviously, none of this is worth anything unless you can then deliver effective behavior change techniques. For those of you who are not aware, behavior change techniques are the active ingredients of our behavior change interventions. Susan Mickey and colleagues developed this 93-item taxonomy a few years ago now, and that is now has been updated by the team to a 280 something. It sounds like a lot, but in many ways easier to work with because it's an ontology now and it's semantically organized. So it's much easier, should be much easier to find the BCTs that you're looking for. But what I've done here is just to pull out some of the most commonly used ones in comms and give them sort of more everyday language labels. And you can see that there are potential behavior change techniques relating to all the 6 of the 9 intervention functions. And I won't go through them here, but this is probably, it's going to be somewhere in here that you're going to have your mix in terms of what your messaging is trying to achieve and so on. So that's what you're aiming to produce. So at the end of that process, you will have used literature review, audience research, and so on, your scientific understanding to map a path to impact. And that's what your comms always needs to do. If you can't map a path to impact, then you may get lucky and it may work, but it may not. It probably won't, to be honest. So you need to chart a clear causal path from what needs to change to what content and delivery is going to be best suited to achieving that. And you can do that. This is just the way we do it through a COM-B diagnosis. Last part, right. So the turning this communication strategy into a campaign. This is where the communications experts and the creatives and so on come in. And to go back to what I was saying right at the beginning, we've got this sort of 2-part process. We've used our sort of behavioral science, the behavior change wheel and so on to decide on what BCTs we're going to deliver and a little bit about what the strategy is going to be. But in order to have impact, that has to get through and it has to meet these other criteria of being attended to and so on. So that's what we're trying to achieve in order to get impact. And therefore what we're doing is we're going from our communication strategy, which includes the BCTs and their implementation, to a communications campaign, which we can think of in terms of the message, the source, and the delivery. So in terms of the message, source, and delivery, we've got our BCTs from our COM-B analysis and so on. Right at the beginning, I talked about the function, the communication function, the tone, and the audience. So those are things that we want to pay attention to. For the source is incredibly important. Source credibility, trust, likability, and so on, massively important in comms. So we need to think about what kind of source is it going to be. For example, if it's a government campaign and the government knows that it's not going to be trusted on something, it may not want to be seen as the source of that communication. It may want to use something else, an NGO, a trusted charity, whatever it might be. This happens a lot in certain domains. Sources need to be seen to be consistent by the audience. So if you've got a source that's been saying one thing at one time and now it's saying something different, that could be a challenge. And of course, it has to have authority. In terms of the delivery, you've got choices to make about the channel of communication, what kind of media you're going to use and so on, the schedule of delivery, the timing, which is critically important, the design factors, and the mode of delivery. And this, you can see this is a big job to try to achieve. And all I'm doing is giving you the sort of framework. So for promoting acceptance, I'm just going to focus on this. This is where all the work that's been done on persuasion comes in. And I spent the early part of my career as a psychologist looking at persuasive communications. And there is a huge literature on this. There's also some sort of fairly dodgy, bogus sort of pseudoscience literature. And I won't say any names, but you probably know who they are anyway. But there is a huge literature on persuasive communications, and a lot of work was done actually after the Second World War in what they call the Yale program. I don't know if any of you remember or have read about the Yale program. This was an attempt by the American military to figure out how to do propaganda more effectively, but actually it came up with some useful things. But essentially what we're looking at here in persuasive communications is source effects and message effects. And I won't go into the details here, again, because of time, but you can use this as a kind of crib sheet for, if you download it, for the kind of things you want to pay attention to. One of the things that is on the list, which is critically important and seems a bit obvious, but I cannot emphasize it enough, is repetition. Repetition. And that's important in comms campaigns for many reasons, but one of them is that governments often think that you can skimp on the cost of these campaigns by putting out a message and then everyone knows the message and it's fine, right? Not so. The more you've got to get it onto people's eyeballs and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And the more, our research shows, the more money you spend on it in terms of getting this in front of the audience and repeating it, the more impact you get. So it is a false economy. To any of you who might be from the UK government listening, it is a false economy to skimp on the cost of these interventions. They can be life-saving interventions that actually save more money than they cost, but you have to invest in them. Now, I'm just going to finish by exploring with you. This whole thing is exploratory, right? These are just ideas and things that hopefully you'll find, some of them you'll find helpful. But how generative AI can help. And I know that, because I've asked, that comms agencies use these generative AI, and there's good reason for it. There can be huge labor-saving devices. You're not relying on them to come up with your great ideas, but they can be very helpful. But this is where the behavioral science can really help and support, and communication science can really help to the human to work with the AI to produce the kind of advice and suggestions and answers that are going to be most useful to you. So it's about what they call prompt engineering, and it's about behaviorally informed prompt engineering. And so what you do with these AI applications is you usually, at the moment, it'll get fancier as time goes on, but at the moment you have what you call a context, which might be a document of some sort, or several documents, could be 100 documents, a prompt, which is the question or the thing that you're asking the AI to do, and then it will come up with some suggestions. And so just to illustrate how you would use what I've just been saying to achieve this, what we can include in the context and the prompt for one of these large language models are, first of all, the BCTs. And by the way, these large language models know about BCTs. They know about behavior change techniques. They don't always get it right, but actually, if you say 93-item taxonomy or BCT TV1, or increasingly, now that the ontology is here, the BCT ontology, it'll know what you're talking about. Okay, or you can, even better, you can put a spreadsheet or a document containing all the BCTs and their definitions, which you can just download off the web from the ontology, into the context. Just put it in as an attachment to say, use this. So this, you can get very, very good understanding from these models of BCTs. The communication function I talked about, communication tone, and the audience focus. And what that can do is to help you to design a structured prompt to put into the application. And I've just used an example here. It really helps to tell the program what your role is in this. So what you want to get out of it. So I'm responsible for creating messaging for a communications agency. I want to create a communications campaign to increase the number of people who sign up to donate blood. I attach a document that contains a list of BCTs that the campaign should deliver, because you've done the work, communication functions that should be identified as relevant, the tone, and the analysis of the audience. Give me 10 short suggestions for messages that will do that, giving reasons. And then you give it a Word file or a PDF with what you've done in terms of creating your communication strategy. So you've got your BCTs, and I've just chosen, I haven't done the work for this. This is not my area, but it's just to illustrate that these are the BCTs. It might be raise awareness, prompt commitment, and inform the consequences. I've just chosen 3. Audience features, you might have discovered that the audience you're interested in is mainly passive and uninformed, that communication functions to use you've decided or determined should be tell people about, show, inspire, reassure, and then the tone should be generous, friendly, and empathetic. So you're giving it you're giving it something to work from. And this is the kind of stuff that Claude would come up with. I would definitely put it into DeepSeek first, see what it thinks about that. But it will come up with some good stuff. But very importantly, as an example to those of us who are doing it as creatives, or as communications strategists, it will give reasons. So it's thought it through, and it's got it's giving you the reasons as to why it's come up with that particular message. So did you know that a single donation can save up to 3 lives? Your 45 minutes can change someone's entire future, and it tells you why it's come up with that message. And the second one is quite a good one. Blood can't be manufactured. It comes from people like you. Sign up today and we'll guide you through every step. When you donate blood, you join a community of everyday heroes. Schedule your first appointment, so action focused. Your blood is someone's lifeline. Discover how unique gift matters, etc., etc. So this is really just an illustration of how we can be, and we're just at the beginning of this, how we can use our behavioral science with the generative AI to get it to do a much better job than we would otherwise do. So the key messages then from that last part are design for behavior, not buzz. Creative campaign design should always be linked to the path to impact, and the design should follow evidence-based principles in support of these communication things. And then just to recap then, the 3 key messages that I'm wanting to get across in this presentation. One is communication is always integral, or almost always integral, to what you're trying to achieve, whatever it might be. And it's about activation, map the path to impact, and design for behavior, not buzz. That's it. Thank you.